All right, Game Day Podcast. Filling in for Rece Davis, I'm Kevin Clark. Filling in for Pete Thamel, Spencer Hall. Do you feel like Pete Thamel, Spencer Hall?
I've never felt like Pete Thamel once in my life, Kevin, and nor has he felt like me. So I feel like I'm the best possible substitute.
So let's just go through it. Pete Thamel, great suits all the time, great information, great hair. How do you stack up in that regard?
I'm 0 for 3 there, but
yeah,
we're gonna.
I'd say,
but still we ball up top, Kevin.
Rece Davis, same thing. I'm about 0 for 50. I was once in the hotel for the Georgia, Alabama Natty in Indianapolis. I was in the hotel with all the ESPN folks before I worked for ESPN, and Rece Davis walked through the lobby, and it was all college football fans. It was like Elvis 1967. I've never seen anything like it.
No one is more competent than Rece Davis.
That's correct.
Quote me on that. I mean, in any field, I mean, in any endeavor.
That is correct. Also a warrior because he worked 22 straight hours in Berkeley, California. That's the most anybody's ever worked in Northern California ever. And it was he called the Miami game until 2:30 in the morning, East Coast time, obviously 11:30 West Coast time. And it is a well-deserved break for him. So we're going to pick some games, buddy. Are you excited? Are you? So I've talked about this all week, but like, I don't like conference realignment necessarily. I think you and I are on the same page as far as we understand that the sport runs on hate, and a lot of times hate is regional, and it revolves around spite and hate watching and all of the things that propel us through a week. It's not just the games. It's pure fury at people you barely know. And a lot of times that comes from being the one state over or being the two in-state schools. But when I see Ohio State and Oregon, NBC 7:30, I say, you know what? I can handle this too.
One thing we've ignored in realignment is this. If you've ever had a close group of friends and you hang out too much with that close group of friends and we invite someone new into the room, suddenly everything's interesting again. That's kind of a side effect here when you're talking about what happens with realignment. Additionally, you get these matchups, which in our brains are still special non-conference games. I know that you know this is a conference game, but in your head, this is still novel because it's Ohio State, it's Oregon. They don't see each other very much. I think the last time I can remember these two playing, it was for a national title in Dallas. So this is, I'm sorry, Arlington. But what we need to remember here is this. Ohio State and Oregon, if we're trying to figure out who's going to win, right? If you want to go ahead and take the mystery out of things, you have to look at who is generally going to be more efficient. And it's very hard to be more efficient than Ohio State when you have that defense. Right now, Ohio State is better at running the ball. They are more efficient at running the ball, and they are a better defense. You might want to look at the quarterbacks. I wouldn't do that. Both these guys are kind of operators. They're kind of functioning within the system. Neither one of them, I think, is by themselves totally capable of taking over a game. If that's not true, I got to fall back on the fundamentals, unfortunately. And the fundamentals definitely stack up for Ohio State. If you want the one big complicator for that, look at Ohio State's schedule. If you want to say, if I could see a scenario where they come out and they're a little shocked by long road trip, Oregon coming out and being faster than they've seen this season, right? Which is just human, by the way. That's not, thank you, overly defensive Ohio State fan who's in my head who's like, I don't know, they're fast too. It doesn't matter. The first time you face somebody who's on par with you, it's going to be a little bit stunning. If Oregon even got out to a 14-0 lead here, I would say those are the 14 least significant points you will see scored, because overall Ohio State will simply press the talent advantage, which they have barely over Oregon, especially at the skill positions, see wide receiver. And I think they come away with a win.
Okay, so first of all, Ohio State's favored by 3 on the road. The record for Big Ten teams traveling 2+ time zones to the West Coast this season, can you guess? Have you seen this number?
I have not seen this number.
It is 1-8. Indiana beat UCLA. UCLA is really bad, by the way.
Bankable. No, Indiana's really good, Kevin. That's what we're going to do. We're going to give the Hoosiers the credit they deserve.
That's kind of what I wanted to get into, because UCLA and Michigan State are bad. Their trenches are really bad. So Oregon playing against them, I didn't draw from it a lot. Iowa is probably the best team either of these two teams have played. Iowa's really good. Iowa has fundamentals that are okay. Yes. Ohio State just boat raced them. I wouldn't turn them as really good. They have lost to Iowa State and all that stuff. But they're the best team on any of these two schedules. For me, The biggest thing here is sloppy play that I've seen from Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah.
The fact that Ohio State's both of these rosters are stacked in theory, but Ohio State's upper level guys have performed better than
Yeah.
Oregon's have. Now there are some exceptions. Derek Harmon has, I think, leads a team of pressures. He was the transfer from Michigan State. He's really good. Jordan Birch is right up there. They rush the passer, but when I'm looking at Ohio State, I'm saying, okay, their pieces fit a little bit more. Evan Stewart from Texas A&M, who I thought was going to be almost like, even though he's not a freshman, almost like a Jeremiah Smith level game breaker, has not been the guy I thought he was going to be so far. This is almost like boxing, where no boxers fight anybody of any note anymore. They just go like 5 straight bad boxers, then finally it marinates enough, and then you fight the good person. And all you can really go off of in boxing, I'm a big boxing fan, is did you ever look mortal against a bad boxer? Oregon has looked mortal against Boise State, against Idaho. Ohio State, I think, is rounding into more form. I like them here.
I think when you're looking at it, how many imaginary scenarios do you have to make up, and how fantastic do they have to be before we get to a point where Oregon wins? That's where I start failing an Oregon prediction here, is where I go, oh, I have to invent magical stuff, right? I have to be like, oh, Will Howard has 4 turnovers. If we're starting at that, and Will Howard could have 4 turnovers. Everybody has a game. I call it the my stomach hurt game, and I commit 4 turnovers, right? Like everybody just comes out, everything's wrong. You make a bunch of mistakes and you can't recover, right? So I have to do that to get Oregon over here. It just seems like Ohio State's an easier bet.
I completely agree. Again, the West Coast thing is the only thing that plays in my mind, but Ohio State's better. Ohio State right now.
We're having to invent things, right? Like I know that's there.
Yes,
that's there, but we have to be like, well, they get on a plane. Okay, fine, whatever. Buckeyes, yeah.
Well, the biggest thing for me is like when you start talking about things that aren't football and aren't the roster talent, then you're getting into fantastical scenarios. So yes, we both agree. All right, Ole Miss. Oh, real quick, I just want to say, and this is not the only game where we're talking about this, but like the portal and NIL has created a situation where it's soccer style pressure, where it's like you have this roster, and if you don't win a championship, you might get fired. Like that to me, like, oh, they spent $20 million on this roster, so you have to win now. And that really wasn't, even though there was external pressure before that, this is a new thing as far as actual finances leaking. It is European style. You have to win a championship or you might get fired situation. Okay. Ole Miss at LSU, ABC 7:30, Ole Miss 3.5 point favorites. What do you think?
I do like that, if only because this LSU team, while becoming more consistent from their debut, is still, to me, going to lose on the basis of, I think the defense can't quite hold. That's my guess. Additionally, I feel better late in the game with the team that I think has the better approach to running the ball. And I think at this point, that is undoubtedly Ole Miss, because Jackson Dart will pull that thing. However, I will also say this. LSU is not quite as good because I think a lot of their run game is currently playing for the Washington Commanders. The thing that made their run game so deadly is having that QB run option. If I pull you on a half boot or a boot as a quarterback, and I know you're not going to take it anywhere, it's a lot easier for me to tee off on you. So I think late in the game with 2 offenses that can both put up points, I'm again going to default to simple, ugly math and say, I think Ole Miss, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, fundamentally the more sound team.
Okay. Does the bye for LSU and a home game for LSU matter enough for that? Like, are you factoring that in? Like, Ole Miss does not play well on the road. LSU, for its sins, plays really, really well at home. Like when it's a talent toss-up, and I do believe it's a talent toss-up, that's when I start to get into things that aren't football. And a night game in Death Valley is, to me, that kind of thing.
As a night game in Death Valley veteran, I would agree, having seen the spectacle that is Death Valley under the lights several times. That's very real. However, I will say this. The dynamic between these two teams going, and this includes last year's game as well, this is going to be a shootout. Neither of these teams are going to be short on points. So if I get, in my head, when I play that out, I go, okay, well, who do I trust more, right? If you want to stop Ole Miss, you got to be able to get penetration up front and really mess up a lot of the sort of backfield run game before they ever get to anything they build off of that. And I don't think LSU's really demonstrated the ability to do that. Additionally, I think LSU can get kind of one-dimensional. So I think if you're one-dimensional and I know what you have to do, then things get very hard for Garrett Nussmeier. And that's not doing him any favors because he's an excellent quarterback, and I think he'll only get better. But they're going to have to build up something to give him protection besides, hey, you're talented. Why don't you figure it out?
Is Brian Kelly going to get fired?
I do not think so. But what you see is a mounting kind of, like a boil of disrespect festering in the LSU community for Brian Kelly, because if you are frustrating as a coach, if you are coming up with 9 to 10 wins, but not the 11th, if you are the kind of guy who can get you to a simmer, but not a boil, which is starting to feel like that's what the Brian Kelly era is at LSU, then I need you to be one of two things. I need you to be one, super likable, or two, I need or two, I need you to be looking at an NFL job so that I know that either you're going to go soon, or I like you too much to fire you, and that's not really where Brian Kelly's at. So he's good enough to not get fired, but he hasn't been great enough to be tolerable, and that is a bad spot for a coach.
Here's my feeling on it. Culture fit doesn't matter if you're winning. It matters if you're losing. That's the first thing I'll say about that.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, the thing with Brian Kelly is I think he went to LSU because he knew, and this still remains true in the 12-team era. It still remains true in the portal era and then NIL era. There's a big old difference, Spencer, between a team that can make the playoff and a team that can win the playoff. Like a huge difference. The difference between the fourth team and the first team in college football in the playoff is usually pretty massive. There's usually 2.5 teams that can win the national championship, and the floor is recruiting. And I feel like Brian Kelly thought he was going to go to LSU, get Louisiana recruits, and everything in that state is geared toward Louisiana kids going to LSU. It is a very easy job in which to recruit. So I feel like LSU is the type of place. So I have something called no excuses jobs. It's my list of teams where in year 2, you should be competing for a conference championship, and there's no excuse for you not to be doing that. Teams like Florida, for instance, no excuse for you not to be competing for the SEC. Having said that, I think LSU's in a different bucket. I think they're they're a no excuses plus. They should be competing for a national championship in year 2. Like, I don't think there's any reason not to. I don't think there's any kind of way you can blame, especially in the portal era, and say, oh, well, we were left with a bare cupboard. Like, no. It's your job to assemble talent at LSU, and it's one of the easiest places in the country to do that. So, to me, that's why I think there's a danger there of one day, if there's a 9-win season next year or whatever, people just saying, we don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a place where the expectations are so lofty that even a degree of disappointment can become toxic.
All right, Spencer, time for a commercial, buddy.
Let's make some bills.
All right, wow, what a commercial break that was. All right, Texas at Oklahoma. Texas, 14.5-point favorites. I dove deep into some of these numbers. You were mentioning like the fantastical scenarios here.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There are no miracles. The old line in from Drive to Survive, there are no miracles in F1. Not a lot of miracles in college football when the talent gap, in my opinion, is this big, but also Texas, no one on Texas and their offensive line has allowed more than 3 pressures this year, the entire season. Texas is the best at limiting chunk plays in the entire country. I just don't know. Michael Hawkins has been pressured on more than half his dropbacks. I don't know, man. I'm trying to talk myself into a classic, but sometimes everybody always talks about the rivalry games and, little pixie dust. Like, I don't know. I've been watching college football for a long time, Spencer. I've seen a lot of blowouts in rivalries where teams just hate each other. Like, it happens. Sometimes the gap is just too big.
I will defend Oklahoma's prospects by saying this. The Red River has a greater variance than almost any other major rivalry, which, by the way, you can go watch me talk about on ESPN's YouTube channel under the college football, because I did a whole series on rivalries there, including the Red River Rivalry.
Click and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. This is a rivalry where especially recently, that hasn't mattered as much. There are long runs historically in the rivalry, but something weird is happening right now between the two programs, just kind of how they're built. Over the past 5 to 10 years, you've seen a lot of outright upsets. You've seen a lot of shootouts. You've seen a lot of extremely topsy-turvy results, and partial results, because sometimes like it's just as surprising when one team actually manages to lead for a half, because you go, wow, you were The other team was favored by 14 and a half. That's happened as well. So what I think you're going to see happen is that the first quarter and a half to 2 quarters could be kind of scary because Brent Venables is very good at junk balling. He's very good at throwing a bunch of crap that the offense did not anticipate, weird coverages, just
Yeah.
baffling strategy that sometimes they do things that may not even make sense just to show it to you, right? There's that NFL approach of, okay,
Yeah.
listen, I'm going to show one frame that is so disturbing to you that when I fall back and cover 3 after this, it's going to seem really weird. They do a lot of that, and that's something that I don't think Texas has really necessarily seen. Additionally, I think that Hawkins will keep them in this for a little bit because a scrambling quarterback, once we
Mhm.
go ahead and take the X's and O's out of the game and turn it into rugby, he does pretty well. Unfortunately, a second half and an obvious talent differential and Oklahoma's inability to sort of maintain a consistent offensive posture in this game, it's going to doom them.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be more than 14 and a half points?
No, I don't. I think Oklahoma is going to be closer than the anticipated point spread. However, I do think they lose.
KSU at Colorado. KSU 3.5 point favorite. Shiloh Sanders expected to be back. This Colorado team, I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting dangerously close to do you believe I believe territory here with this Colorado team. And I have my reasons for that, but I'll give the floor to you before I go on my spiel.
Competent. The defense is competent. You're starting to play complementary football to some degree. And when you do that, everybody gets better. So I would say I've upgraded them from farcical front, like business front, to competent. That's where they're at. Kansas State is better than competent. And that's so if you want to level up Colorado, beat Kansas State, which maybe I can say this in this podcast. That's a football team coached by a football coach who would say things like program if he were from the South. Like that's
Yep.
definitely where he's at. Um, beat them, beat them, and we'll upgrade you to genuine football product.
All right. So Bud Elliott has talked about this before, and I think it's
Mhm.
important context for every conversation we have about football, which is that there's an
Yeah.
18 team list of teams that recruit, spend, and operate as if they can win the national championship. I believe 15 of them are in the Power Two conferences, and then Clemson, Florida State, and Miami are the other three. Notice I did
Yeah.
not say any of those teams were in the Big 12. In fact, the blue chip ratio, which is the best predictor of whether or not a team can win the national championship, has 0 Big 12 teams left in it. The Big 12 teams that are left there do not recruit, do not stack talent in a way that's consistent with big winners. What I'm saying here is that Colorado having potentially QB1,
Mhm.
Colorado having a guy who I think is the only real threat to Cam Ward in the Heisman. And in fact, I think if Hunter plays well on both sides of the ball, he probably should win the Heisman just because we haven't seen that in a long, long time. Um,
Mhm.
and Avery Johnson, one of the worst passer ratings under pressure in football this year. He's made some bad mistakes. But the point I'm making is that Colorado can
Mhm.
win the Big 12 by being top heavy. And
Yeah.
I didn't really believe that until, and I'm this is a can. We're just doing pathways here, but I
Mhm.
like Colorado here at home, and I also like Colorado to win more games than I thought because I'm looking at this Big 12 and I'm just saying, I don't know, man. I see if you have a handful of special players, you can win games, almost like basketball. And when you don't run into buzzsaws that have a 92% blue chip ratio, that's what I'm thinking
Right.
about Colorado.
I think that's fair. And I do think it's fair because if those players manage to not get injured, then you can go top heavy, rely on a couple of skilled players and an improving defense to float you to the top of a conference that is, and I say this as a compliment, anarchy. The Big 12 is anarchy. Almost any team can beat any other team. It's what happens when you have the unique set of conditions that has
Yep.
created this conference. This is also me saying it's the most entertaining conference. If you want a game where you could just jump in at random, select any game, and get an interesting result, the Big 12 is going to more reliably than the Big 10 of the SEC pay that out for you. That also leads to the frustrating notion of you and I have to sit here and discuss whether Colorado can beat Kansas State, which just 4 weeks ago would have seemed preposterous. We would have said
Correct.
absolutely not. But now, season playing out, you go, I don't know. I'm not right. I'm not writing them off yet. Like it's lean Kansas State. However, this is not surprising either.
Uh, Completely agree. By the way, I was listening to a pod this morning. It may have been Andy Staples and Ari. If it
Hmm.
wasn't, I'm just gonna give them the credit anyway. And they were just joking about the 3.5 point line and making the point that like 3.5 is the default Big 12 line, saying,
Yeah,
"Yeah, I don't know, pal. Here's 3.5 points. Good
that's
luck.
the
Good luck,
entire
everybody."
the entire conference is favored by 3.5, right? In whatever endeavor they decide, or down by 3.5. It doesn't vary much more than that, right?
Yeah,
This is a lot like it feels like the ACC about 15 years ago or 10 years
yeah,
ago, where we were like, I don't know, the score's always 24-17. That's what it always feels
yep,
like.
yep. It's gonna come down to one Ron Cherry call. All right, we'll be back after this. South Carolina at Alabama, ABC noon
Hmm.
Eastern time. Alabama 21-point favorites. I've watched a lot of breakdowns on what Alabama's defense did against Vanderbilt. And the biggest problem is how it looked. They looked lazy, slow, predictable. They obviously have amazing talent, most
Hmm.
talented roster by 24/7 in the sport. But when I watched that Alabama defense lose to Vanderbilt, and I believe they'd given up 13 points to Vanderbilt in the entire Nick Saban era, all I can say is this: to quote the great Michael Irvin, we are losing recipes.
This is your get back game, and it's
Yes,
happening
has to
against a
be.
team, and it is happening against a team where I think you have an opportunity to get it back because you know what South Carolina is going to do. They're very predictable on offense. They are going to try to run the ball both with quarterback and running back and are sometimes capable of doing that. That's happened.
Yep.
It's not particularly consistent though. And that is, I think, a difficult matchup offense versus offense because Alabama has been explosive but maybe not as consistent as they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that goes with the run game. One of the keys in the Vandy game is that Vandy really did hold them to under 100 yards rushing
Mm-hmm.
on the day. That's not tolerable for that offense, given Jalen Milrose. Jalen Milroe, I don't want to call him necessarily inaccurate, but they go deep a lot, and that's just going to yield. And I would too if I had Ryan Williams. I would
Yep.
I would give the ball to Ryan Williams every down, and you could yell at me about it, and we'd still win every game. However, I do think we might, when you go, ooh, watch out for South Carolina. They got good defensive ends. They could put some pressure on this team. They could. But I will tell you, betting on this South Carolina team to be anything remotely consistent, they go boom or they go bust. There is no degree in between play to play.
First of all, before I get into South Carolina, Dylan Stewart's celebration, I understand it was the most 15-yard penalty I've ever seen in my entire life. If you missed it, he
Hmm.
did a machine gun celebration right in the face of a Kentucky player.
Hmm.
We secretly and quietly, I think you agree, support it.
Um, I I would say this: you have to flag him for that. You
Yes.
do. Like you have to flag him 100% for that. Um, I I support his
Yeah.
ability. I just support his decision to celebrate.
Yeah.
How's that?
I
I may
yes.
not
I
personally
we
agree
yes.
with that celebration. But if he wanted to dance on him for way too long, my favorite thing I've seen this season as a point of emphasis, and this is hilarious to me, if you see somebody start to dance in the end zone and they start to
Yeah.
like move, the ref comes over like, no, 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 no. Think of the children. Like they have this obvious
Put a
panic
blanket
on
on
their
him. Put a
right.
blanket on him. Be like, no, sir, sir, sir.
There, sir. No, no, no. Screens. We need screens and sheets. Yeah. Block this. Like, it's great. If you watch the ref afterwards, they come over like, please don't make me flag you for this.
Yeah.
Please. Because they're gonna see this on film that I have to come over and act like I'm panicked. I'm not. Just please stop dancing, which is hilarious to walk over to like a 270-pound man who just returned a fumble, right? And you have to walk up and go,
Yeah.
sir, please stop gyrating.
It's like Elvis, like FCC censors on Elvis in 1958. All right. So South Carolina is not capable of the discipline required, the third down conversions that
No.
Vanderbilt had, the chunk plays that Vanderbilt had. I just don't. Vanderbilt had a time of possession of 42 minutes. South Carolina is not going to
Yeah.
be able to do that. And so that's why I think Alabama covers in
No.
this game. I think everybody's angry. I think Kalen DeBoer knows he has to. This is a fan base not used to losing. And I don't think you can overstate how quickly they're going to get angry and furious. So Kalen DeBoer probably knows
Yeah.
that. And so does Shane Beamer.
Yeah. You haven't seen Alabama fans on the loose.
All right. Penn State at USC. CBS 3:30 Eastern Time. Penn State 5.5 point favorites. You mentioned, so this is a 12:30 game in LA. You mentioned that's going to be weird for Penn State. You mentioned how there's just a sort of exotic tinge to every game like this. To me, the
Mhm.
funniest thing has been seeing Lincoln Riley and the trenches that he's built get bullied by random Minnesotans. And so now here comes Penn State.
Yeah, Penn State, who, according to the stats, Penn State's been pretty good. And I
Yes.
think I think like if you look at efficiency, F plus, etc., the numbers do not lie. This is a more efficient team than they were last year. And we keep saying efficient. Let me just dumb that down to a level where even I can understand it. That means they don't mess up. That means that per
Yep.
play, they're just way better than they were last year. A lot of that goes to the hire of Andy Kotelnicki, their new offensive coordinator who comes from Kansas. If you don't doubt that he made some impact at Kansas, go look at how uncomfortable Jalen Daniels has been this year for the Jayhawks.
Yep.
And when I talk about consistencies and bankable, like if you want to go, okay, if I'm looking at this team and who's going to come out ahead and who's going to be more bankable, thus far, that's Penn State. And that's a shame because
Mm-hmm.
at USC, they've done a lot of the things that Lincoln Riley want. We accuse Lincoln Riley of not wanting and not doing consistently. USC's defense really has improved. They've shown the ability to get deep in games and defend even like they've been good in their own end, which is something that
Mm-hmm.
I can't ever remember saying about a Lincoln Riley defense, much less the ones that they fielded at USC. But offensively, they've got to be more consistent. That's you keep saying the same things over again, right? Like I really do trust Penn State to just turn this into a more process type game where you look up and go, well, I don't remember much happening, but it's 24-10 and we're heading into the fourth quarter.
All right. Here's a stat from Joel Haas. The FBS record for lowest percentage of passes intercepted in a career is 1.2%. Would you like to guess who holds that record, Spencer Hall?
1.2%.
Yes. Famous player. Famous player.
Famous player. Joe Burrow.
Famous player. No, Marcus Mariota.
Oh, delightful.
There you go. Drew Aller sits at, so remember I said 1.2%, right? Drew Aller
Mhm.
sits at, after 552 attempts, 0.5%. And he's taking, it's not dink and dunk. He's hitting mid-level jumpers here, mid-range jumpers. And so
Mhm.
I like that. I like James Franklin. Let me ask you, we talked about fantastical scenarios earlier. I think we've always pegged the Franklin Penn State teams as a
Mhm.
team that win a bunch of games. Maybe they steal one from an Ohio State or Michigan, maybe, but not both. That they're not going to climb the mountaintop, so to speak, and get to national championship level. When you look at this team, do you see a pathway?
No, I don't. And again, this is where I will go to the James Franklin and the way that they play and the way that they built things is just so designed for we're gonna lose a first round playoff game. Like on the full cast, on the shutdown full cast, this has been our joke that like the pinnacle of the James Franklin era will be to
Yeah.
get a home playoff game and immediately lose it to someone that they shouldn't.
Yes. Yes.
They've done a
Absolutely.
lot. They've done a lot. And if you want me to explain exactly why that is, I've got like half total superstition and
Mhm.
half facts. And it's that this Penn State team for the longest time has been the third best team in the Big Ten. Their pinnacle at this point will be the second best team if they manage to
Mhm.
surpass Michigan, which I think they could given Michigan's offensive struggles this year. However, that still puts you at two, right? You're not going to get past Ohio State. You're not going to spend as much money as them. You're not going to
Mhm.
get the talent that they get. Okay. The machine is bigger. And there really isn't a whole lot you can do about that short of dumping the state of Pennsylvania's treasury directly into the football program, which I suggest you look into. Okay. Go ahead.
Missouri's kind of doing that with their NIL laws.
Yeah. How's that going for him?
So I mean,
How's that looking for him
they're better than
recently?
they used to be.
Just
They're better than they used to
I
be.
love that they put that much money. They put that much money to an NIL program, and some like walk on that they paid in
Yeah.
nickels is the thing that they miss most. They miss Cody Schrader in that offense, a dude who was like a no hope, no star, nothing, and he comes out and runs for over 2,000 yards for them, and they cannot find a way to replace him with all that money in the world.
World cannot buy you a Cody Schrader. Here's my thought on this. You mentioned that I can't think of any funnier scenario, and I am so empathetic towards any fan base who suffered a lot, can't get over the hump, whatever. Like I'm empathetic to basically every college football fan base if they're not winning national championships, because I know the feeling of Saturday night just being like how I don't want to live anymore.
Yeah. Go Gators.
A whiteout in January and a loss to like a 2-loss Clemson team, and then Dabo giving a lecture afterwards. Like that to me, just 90,000 sad fans wearing white would be one of the funniest outcomes of the season, or like a 4-loss Texas A&M team,
or what you get in. Let's say they get into Miami and they're like, oh, guess what? There's a chill in the air at Penn State. Happy Valley has got frost on the pumpkin, right? Like this is the time. This is when we do it. We're facing a hot weather team. There's no way we can stop them. And Cam Ward goes, nah, it just throws 5 TDs and scrambles for like 80 yards and completely destroys them. And that just feels right to me. That's an emotional truth. And frankly, until we play the games, that's just as good as your statistical projections here.
I'm going to do 5 seconds on Cam Ward, okay? We have, in college football, I'm saying we as in the college football world, the most exciting quarterback since Johnny Football, in my opinion, if you look at a play-by-play basis, what he's been able to do. And the media has taken that conversation and made it about best practices and replay review. So there you go.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Just
don't do it.
Cam Ward, awesome. Player mobility is great because that dude came from Incarnate Word.
That's correct.
Right? Incarnate Word to Wazoo to Miami. That is the dream. And if you don't believe me on another platform, Diego Pavia, New Mexico Military Institute, New Mexico State, Vandy, story of the year in terms of single game shot. Player mobility in the transfer portal is awesome.
So real quick on that. So Joe Burrow had a clip, I think on the Full Send podcast over the summer, where he said that he believes that the problem with NFL quarterbacks, they don't learn to win because a lot of them go to USC or Georgia and win 42-17 and then go, hi, I'm here in the NFL. I throw perfect passes. And you've never known exactly what it feels like to know that it's 3rd and 11. And if you don't pick this third down up, there's going to be a small riot. You just don't know that feeling. And Cam Ward or Josh Allen, he gave the examples of Josh Allen and Texas Tech and Patrick Mahomes and Texas Tech, where it's like, if I don't score 50 points, we're going to lose. That was Patrick Mahomes' opinion on every single play. A fact, not opinion, on every single play in Lubbock for 3 years. And that he learned how to make big plays there. Cam Ward has emerged from the fires of Incarnate Word and the worst offensive line in the Pac frickin' 12. And that's why he can play like he plays now.
All true. We could talk about this for an hour, but in short, give people reps, give them experience, see what happens. And that's how you get a quarterback who is a 2 or 3 star and he ends up playing like a 4 or 5 star because experience will make you a lot more talented.
All right. Real quick, Iowa State at West Virginia, Fox, 8 p.m. Iowa State, 3-point favorites here.
Yes, Iowa State. Back to Matt Campbell par. Back to Matt Campbell ferocity in terms of locking down opposing offenses and running mean ball control offenses on the other side. This is all cool. It really all depends on what we get with a quantum team like West Virginia. I say quantum because they might exist and they might not. And theoretically, it's impossible to state which one will show up because they've been very good and they've been very bad. It's in West Virginia. Terrible environment for road teams. Just not a pleasant place to be. The only place where I've been a fan in the stands looked up and said, I don't think you had to say that. And I've been to LSU a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the only place where I've looked up at another fan and gone, sir, that is too much. That is far too much. But I like Iowa State just because I think they're in phase right now. They've been, pardon my repetition, they've been more bankable. And I think this is a team that if you had your safest bet to win the Big 12, and there are no safe bets, but the least risky to me feels like Iowa State at this point.
Matt Campbell, Gen Z Al Groh.
Shut your mouth. You take those words back, sir. Take them back. No offense to
What's funny
Alfro.
is do you know what's funny is I met Gen X, but now it's much funnier just imagining that like Zoomers just love Matt Campbell. Just that my instinct was correct, and that just like the TikTok generation is just standing Matt Campbell as their Al Groh.
See, it's very funny that you talk about like generationally speaking that we're trying to misplace Matt Campbell. Neil Brown, the coach in the other half of
Yeah.
this equation, Neil Brown will tell reporters not to cuss. He will say, like literally, he will tell reporters. He's done this to Stephen Godfrey. He's been like language, like that's to things that he said to him in person, which is wild to me. Neil Brown is the most greatest generation coach of any of our guys. If you told me Neil Brown had stormed the beaches at Normandy, I'd be like, he looks great. He looks fantastic for his age.
What a note to end on. Spencer Hall, thanks so much for coming on the Game Day podcast, buddy.